Hey guys, and welcome to the season finale of the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. Wow, guys, we've been everywhere, man. Look for a recap episode of this season in the coming weeks. It has been my honor, it really has, been my honor to bring you stories of the crooked roads of hope and healing from trauma. We have had a strong group of brave people that have come onto this podcast and told stories and how they got off of that crooked road. Not all of our guests noted Jesus as the reason, but an overwhelming majority name him as a star of the story. He is the star of mine, and he keeps shining. I went back and listened to the pilot episode the other day, Healing That Doesn't Make Sense, and Oh, From Whence We've Come. And I can't wait to tell you where we're going. But first, I want you to enjoy this very first unscripted freestyle conversation, which ushers us in nicely to the next season. Today, we are talking about spiritual trauma. My guest, Tiffany Countryman, gosh, she's going to bring it today. I promise you that. This is a Gen X meets a millennial conversation. And if you know me, you know my heart for this generation. So I invite you to enjoy this conversation with my friend, Tiffany Countryman. Before we do that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about her. Tiffany is the founder and CEO of MinistryIsMe Ministries, LLC. She's also a Crohn's awareness advocate, a global influencer. She is an accomplished playwright, a writing coach, and a member of many boards. She is a co-host of her own podcast titled Millennial Motherhood, Uncensored, and the delighted wife of Terrence Countryman. Together, they parent 2 children, Terell and Gabrielle. It is her primary goal, guys, I get chills just reading this, to lead souls to Christ, to assist others in fulfilling their destinies, and to creatively contribute to her community until her mission is complete. And so today, guys, it is with great pleasure that I welcome my friend, Tiff, the homie Countryman. Hey, Tiff, welcome to the Wednesdays with Watson podcast, my friend.
What's up, Amy? How's it goes it?
Hey, I actually understood that, which makes it even more interesting. So Tiffany and I, and it feels so weird, by the way, to call you that, because we met on an audio app that, if you don't know about now, you have to be living under a rock, called Clubhouse. And Tiff got quite the presence on Clubhouse, and her moniker is Tiff the Homie, of which is how I know her. So calling her Tiffany is really strange for me. So tell us really quickly, where did that name originate?
The homie, it's just my personality growing up in high school, college, just my friends. Like I'm always the homie. I'm the one that's always there. I'm the one that always brings the life to the party. I'm the one that always makes it better. So I'm everybody's homie.
I'm here to say that is true. I love doing Clubhouse rooms with you, and I was on your own podcast, and that was amazing. So yeah, I think homie is a great way to call it. Now you are dialing into me from Ohio. I'm in Florida. And for the listeners, if you hear thunder, I'm sorry. That's the one thing that my microphone cannot. We're having bad storms here. Well, let me ask you this. I read your bio, but just in a couple quick sentences, tell us who you are. And I listen to other podcasts, and this is usually when I fast forward. I don't want to know. I was born in Covington, Indiana, but who are you?
Oh, okay. Well, I am the middle child of 3. I'm a mother myself. I have 1 daughter. I'm a wife. I'm a business owner. I'm the homie. I'm a friend. I'm a tribe member. I remember, Amy, when you were on my podcast, you talked about your group of 4. I have a group of 3, and there's always one that comes a little bit closer to us, depending on what season we're in. But there's definitely 2 that I call my tribe members. I'm a playwright. I'm a public speaker. I'm a preacher. I'm a lot of things. I'm all things to all men, as Jesus said in the Bible.
And a precious daughter of the Most High God.
Absolutely.
I just love you to death. Well, here's the deal. Here is the deal. I wanted you on the season finale. And the reason
Okay.
why I did that is because I just sent you like this random text, like, hey, Tiff, do you know anybody that could come onto my podcast and speak to spiritual trauma? And you sent the little emoji with the hand up to me. And I was like,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, not that you had but been through spiritual trauma, but that you were willing to come onto the episode. And so for those of you who are listening, you know that we have 4 C's on this podcast. We have trauma-informed counseling, and we have covered that in both seasons with my own story, and we've brought professionals onto the podcast. The second C is community and the importance of community, and Tiff, you just mentioned that so eloquently with your tribe, and as I call my core 4 of people. So my last
Core
episode,
four. Yeah.
yeah, core 4. That last episode that I just dropped called Weaponizing the Gospel was an exhortation to the community, but I believe strongly that you have to have a community, regardless of what your faith is, to survive trauma. And today I want to talk about that third C that we always talk about, which is church. And
Church.
I have been so under conviction to begin to talk about spiritual trauma, and you, quite frankly, are going to usher us in to next season as we begin to talk about spiritual trauma. And so I'm putting my remarkable away now. This is going to be a freestyle conversation because I know you're going to bring it, but you just told us all the things that you were. And so listeners, understand that she's going to tell us a story of spiritual trauma, and I want you to learn something from it, but look at what she has done with it. She has turned all of that pain into purpose, and all of the things that she just told you that she did. And we'll drop all of those links in the show notes. So let's start at the beginning. When did you first start going to church?
I'm a pew baby. I've been in church ever since I was born. I probably was in church while I was in my mother's womb. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, she was what the Black church calls a church mother. She was a mother of the church. She was the one responsible for cooking food after service. She was one of the ones responsible for taking care of the baptismal pool and the candidate. She was that backbone of the Black church, and consequently, my family was ingrained into the church. My mother currently is not a chronic church goer. She loves God. She's a Christian. She loves the Lord. But I'm probably the only one in my family that still attends church. Talking
Wow.
about church trauma, but yeah. So I've been in church all my life, Amy, all my life.
Girl, same. Every time the doors were open, and I think it was like 4 or 5 times a week between youth group and soul winning, and 2 times on Sunday and Wednesday. And you know what? It didn't do me that badly, even though one of my abusers was at church, and I've never
Yeah.
covered that on my podcast. But so talk to me. So you grew up in church, and you are a millennial. And I'm
Yeah.
going to ask you a question right now that's going to make a lot of sense to the listeners here in just a second. How old is
Okay.
your daughter?
My daughter is 7.
Okay, guys. So I want you, for perspective, to understand that we are talking about 8 years ago that this happened. In the 2000s, we are talking about that this happened. Not in
Yes.
1995, not old school thinking, not just Gen X, but we're talking about 8 years ago. Tiff's story happened. So walk us through that. So you're going to church, you're doing your thing, and the mic is
Yeah.
yours, my friend.
Oh, Amy, well, I have a love-hate relationship for the church. Even now, I have a love-hate relationship for the church. There are certain aspects about the church people, church leadership, the different denominations, the rules, the dogmatic. There's just different things about the church that I absolutely just hate. I loathe. I disgust. It makes me sick. Whatever term resonates with you the most. But on the other side, there's beauty in the church, because that's all that I know is the church. My first public speaking opportunity was in the church. My first opportunity to memorize a speech was in the church. My first opportunity to have a friend or a boyfriend or a adopted family member was from the church. So I have this love-hate relationship, and I really hate the church because of some of the things that I've been through. And one of those things is that I don't want to use the word ostracized, but I was pretty much ostracized because I became pregnant outside of marriage. I was a minister in the church. So quick backstory, I'm 33 years old currently, at the time of this recording. And I've been ordained a minister since 21 years old.
Wow.
21 years old. Didn't really know who I was. First of all, I don't want to say I grew up sheltered because I did have freedom and exposure, but I grew up sheltered. I didn't know anything. I know that I was called to preach clearly because I'm still doing it. But in that moment, I feel like I didn't have the proper covering or teaching that a minister needs because there's so much spiritual warfare that comes with the mantle that's not really talked about. So I was ordained at 21 years old and became endowed in the church. I mean, I was a part of huge movements and organizations that held conventions and stuff yearly, and I would travel all around the country preaching. I was invited into large pulpits, storefront churches, local churches, churches down the road. I was always invited, especially during the summer, because that was the youth, all of the youth revivals and youth camps and youth this and youth that. So I landed at a church around 25, and I became a member of that church, and I started serving on the Ministerial Alliance. There was a guy there who was a deacon of the church, He took care of the church. He was pretty much like the pastor's right hand man. I remember he would go up during the week and take the trash out, and he cut the grass and drive the church van. Like, he was this upstanding guy. Long story short, we became involved. We were dating for a while. We actually dated for about 3 years. We dated for a while. But anybody that knows anything about church mess, his family became heavily involved in our relationship, more particularly his sister. His sister. So what I can gather from their situation is that they lost their mother young, and his sister pretty much assumed that motherly role, even though she was younger than him, and she really didn't have much authority or power, wisdom or guidance, but he really leaned on her in that motherly role, and it was toxic. And that is how our relationship ended. So although our relationship ended, we continue to have sexual encounters because, first of all, we were known in this community, in the church world. I wasn't a hoe, so I wasn't out here just having sex with any and everybody. We had a strong sexual connection, and I can honestly say that I loved him. It was his family and just him not, in my opinion, standing up and being a man about life that caused us not to be together. So the very last time, and I never told you this, the very last time that we had sex is when I became pregnant.
Wow.
The very last time we had fell out. What happened was he came over that day. There was something wrong with my car. He came over that day to fix the car, and one thing led to another, and we had sex. But afterwards, I asked him to leave. He wanted to, take a nap and chill out. Like, he was my man. No. You're going to have to leave, sir, because I really don't like you. Like, it was crazy how toxic this was, because we would be at church and wouldn't speak to each other, would be mean mugging each other. But whenever we wanted to get it on, it was just something that was automatic. And I'm sure people listening have had a situationship or entanglement like that once or twice in their lives, where you just can't really explain it. It just is what it is. It doesn't even make sense to you. So I asked him to leave. He got upset, and we did not talk for months, 3 months exactly. We didn't talk. We didn't have sex anymore. In my mind, I said I was not having sex with him anymore. And I'm pretty sure in his mind, he was done as well. So I missed my cycle. And the very first time I missed my cycle, I knew I was pregnant. I knew I was, but I waited and waited, took a test, a little Walgreens test, nothing, substantial at first. And it came up positive. So I said, okay, you go. So I told a couple of friends that are not even a part of my life. That's a whole nother podcast. That whole world and realm, I'm not even connected to those people anymore. And I told a couple of them, just weighing my options, because at this point I'm 26. And I'm going to be honest, Amy, I thought about getting an abortion.
Wow.
I contemplated it. 100%. I
Can I
looked it
stop you
up.
there for a second?
Absolutely.
Was the impotence of you contemplating getting an abortion your fear of how the church would react, or because you weren't
Absolutely.
ready?
Absolutely. No, I was ready. I mean, it was, and this the thing. I'm a tomboy, so I never was like, I want 3 kids, a picket fence, a Cinderella wedding. Like that was never me. Life just happened the way that it did. So it wasn't that I didn't want a child, but it 100% was the church. Because at this time, Amy, I'm going up in my ministerial career, and I could be honest, at that point at 25, 26. My number one goal in life was to become a bishop in the church. I
Wow.
know it's hard to believe now, but back then I wore skirts all the time. I wore stockings all the time. I was very religious. I was very church. My mom even talks about it now. Like, I remember when you went through that phase that, they call the apostolic phase, because I was
Yeah.
in an apostolic denominational church. I contemplated abortion strongly because I knew that I was traveling everywhere. All of that will come to an end because you hear it often. And now I'm in this situation where it's like, you already know how the church is going to react, but my spirit just wouldn't allow me to do it. For whatever reason, personally, I could not reconcile within myself to abort my child. So I called him up, my child's father. I called him up, and he did not believe me. He thought that I was lying. He thought that I was saying that to get back in his good graces, get back connected with him. And this is how I knew that we were both done. Like we were done. Because he wasn't even entertaining it, wasn't entertaining me, wasn't responding to any texts or anything. So I set up an appointment at a local center here to go and get an ultrasound. And I invited him to the ultrasound. And he was like, yeah, I'm coming because this is the only proof because I don't believe nothing that you're saying. Like at this point, we're our arch enemies. And even to this day, Amy, I can't even tell you why we're enemies. We have this disgust for one another, and I can't pinpoint the root of it, but it's just there. Even 8 years later, we cannot have a civilized conversation concerning our child. So we went to the ultrasound, and sure enough, there was the sac. They saw the sac and the heartbeat. I was about 4 months at this time because I remember I was 3 months because I want to tell my mom and everybody else until I was 4 months through that first trimester. So I was pregnant.
And you considered an abortion because of, and here's where I want to hone in the fact that you thought about aborting your child because you were afraid of the backlash of the church is the point of the podcast and the spiritual trauma. So tell
Yeah.
us a little bit. So fast forward to when you had to tell somebody in church leadership or somewhere where you were supposed to go preach or something, hey guys, I'm pregnant, because I want to talk about how the church got it wrong, and then I want you to tell us how the church could have gotten it right as we usher in spiritual trauma. So you go and tell leadership that I'm pregnant.
Yep.
What happened?
And it's an interesting story for that because he forced me to tell our pastor. Because, okay, so go back to the ultrasound. I'm 3 months pregnant, and I have about 3 gigs lined up. That's what we call preaching opportunities.
Yeah.
I have about 3 gigs lined up where I'm getting money. Like this is money coming in.
Right.
And I don't want to say that like I'm preaching for money, but I'm saying that I had these gigs lined up, and from the beginning he came through and he said, you're not going to these preaching gigs, you're not doing anything, we're going to tell the pastor. And I was like, no, can we please just wait? Because I didn't have anything booked after the next month. I was like, let's please just wait. I need to go. I need to get this money because I knew I was going to be sat down. And he was like, no. So he went and scheduled a meeting with my pastor. And now who I am now, I'm mad at who I was 7 years ago. I don't hate her, but I'm like, girl, you didn't have, I felt like I had to show up to this meeting. I felt like I had to sit in the shame and expose myself while these 2 men literally looked down on me. During the meeting, they were standing up while I was sitting down. Like they literally looked down on me while I had to say to my pastor that I was pregnant. So he forced me. He scheduled this meeting with our pastor. It was a random Tuesday in the middle of the day. I pull up first to the church, and I park one way, and he pulls up and he literally parks on the other side of the lot. So it's like this tension and this war between us that didn't necessarily be there. So the pastor pulls up, we go in the office. And so the pastor's like, okay, so why are we here? Because he has no idea. So my child's father's looking all goofy, looking all simple. He's standing at the door. My ex-pastor standing at his desk, and I'm sitting like at this chair in between the two of them. So I'm looking at him like, you called this meeting, so what you gonna say? So after about 5 or 7 minutes, literally, he is laboring to say this. He's all, doing all of these things. And I'm just looking at him because you brought us here. So you're going to be the one to say it. So then he finally says, Tiffany's pregnant. He didn't say, I got Tiffany pregnant, or me and Tiffany are pregnant, or we're having a baby. He said, Tiffany's pregnant. So I immediately turn my head, look at the pastor, and I see the disappointment in his face. Because at this point, I'm the star preacher. I'm the young preacher that's going here, going there. When I preach your whole services, bringing people to the church. And I'm not saying this to boast. I'm saying this to expose that there are people in leadership doing things that have issues, have idiosyncrasies. I was sexing it up, but I was preaching, praying for people. People was falling out, all those good things. So the disappointment in his face. And so he's like, well, you're going to have to cancel, because he knew of a gig, particularly in Cincinnati, because he actually booked it for me. So he said, you're going to have to cancel that. You can't go out preaching, we're going to have to set you down. And so Big Daddy Gabrielle's father was like, well, she also has this going on and this going on too. Like, basically, like,
wow.
Like it was like an attack. And I looked at it like, why would you do that? And so ever since then, we never got along. So that happened. So fast forward 3 months later. So now I'm 6 months pregnant. I have talked with him. We're saying that we're going to go to these classes. At this point, Amy, I am broke, like broke. Like I said in another interview, I didn't even have money to park in the parking garage at the hospital to go get my checkups. I had to park down the street and walk up the hill to the hospital. That's how broke I was. You know how some people say they broke, but they could still pay bills. No, I was broke. And so we had decided that we were going to go to these classes at this Elizabeth place. It's an organization here where they help pregnant women. You go to these classes, educational classes. They give you baby bucks. And then you're able to go and buy cribs and diapers. They have like a whole store where people have donated things. And you bring those baby bucks that you earn from your classes, and you go and buy things for your baby because you don't have money. So you go to the classes and you go get things. So we had came to this agreement, because if the father comes, you get triple the amount if I just came myself. And we're like, we don't have no money for nothing. We need a crib. We need this thing. So I need you to come to these classes. So he came the first couple of months. But then when I was 6 months pregnant, he tells me that he wants to get married. And he was dead serious. He looks at me and said, we need to go ahead and get married. We're not talking. We hadn't had sex again since the last time we had sex. Even though I was pregnant, we don't like each other. And then 6 months in, you want to say, let's go get married? He was like, yeah, because, not thinking about me. I'm a deacon in the church. And once this really hits, because I'm heavy set. So I really wasn't showing until like my last 2 months of pregnancy. So before this hits the fan, I want to go ahead and get married so nobody has nothing to say, yada, 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 blah, 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 blah. The tradition, that traditional church mindset, like, well, let's just marry to cover it up. Even though we're not meant to be together, we don't really love each other. Let's just marry to cover up. So I told him no. Once I told him no, all war let loose. He started spreading my name around the church, saying that I was a hoe, that we were dating and I cheated on him, that now I'm pregnant and the baby's not his. I was at this church, but like I said, my family doesn't go to church anymore. So I was at this church by myself, and he had full-fledged family. He had his sister, his auntie, his nephews, his cousins, his uncle came sometimes. And so they were beginning to weaponize the church around against me. So I'm already sat down and I'm pregnant out of wedlock. And now I'm being labeled as a church hoe. And this star deacon, he never got sat down. Never. He still assumed his duties, was taking up offering, still working an altar call, still passing out communion, still doing hospital visits, still serving, never got sat down, never got reprimanded. And now he's saying that this is not even his child. So for 9 months, I'm walking in this shame that I have a child that I don't even know who the father is, because of what him and his family spread about me around the church, and because I was who I was in the church community, in my local and in some national communities, because I was the woman in the situation.
Wow. So did anybody, because we talk about how important church is on my podcast so much.
Yeah.
Now, those of you who are listening to this episode and perhaps have not seen any graphics, Tiffany is a person of color, and I am not, as you all know. And I know that the Black church environment is way cooler than ours. B, and there may be just some different thought processes, but I want to know, because one of the reasons why we talk about one of the reasons why I want to talk about spiritual trauma is because it's there, regardless of where the listener is, whether they're on where you think that spiritual purity means abstinence before the altar, or whether you're like me, where I think that we are to save sex for marriage, which I didn't do, and it did not go well for me, as well documented on this podcast. But the church, regardless, should not have let you sit in shame. And I'm going to get a little preachy here for a second, because shame tells us that we are the mistake, not that we made a mistake. And so as we usher into spiritual trauma and the things that are happening in church or not happening, and I'll have you on again next season to talk about mental health in the church and how we can do that. But I want to know something. Yeah. Because my only experience with a and I'm air quoting, listeners can't hear me, a Black church was the coolest experience ever. Yeah. But here's where my friend's heart wants to know, and where I believe some of the trauma came in for you, and how amazing it is that you still love a God that these people claim to represent. Did anybody in that church, or anybody that you had been underneath them as a preacher or a Sunday school teacher or just some little old lady in the church, did anybody pull you aside and say, you, Tiffany, are the precious daughter of the Most High God? What can we do to help? Did they throw you a baby shower? Did they help you financially? Did anybody in that church come into your place, regardless of whether you feel like you were wrong or not by getting pregnant? You were hurting, you were poor, you were being maligned at this point by not only by your baby daddy, but by people who listened to him. Did a single soul sit you down and say, hey, I love you, let us walk you through this, what can we do? Did a single soul do that?
Not one person, Amy. Not one person in that church. Now, when my mother threw me a baby shower, and some people that I invited from the church, they did come to the baby shower, and they did buy my daughter a gift. But that was a select few. But as far as covering me, helping me, holding me, checking on me, putting some money in my hand, taking me up under their wing, preparing me for motherhood. Like, I wasn't prepared for, I've seen married couples when they're pregnant, it's other, older mothers in the church that come and, give some sort of advice. Like, this is what you're going to need to do. Nothing. I was experiencing silent treatment. People were not speaking to me. There were points where the pastor, no, I had to come, sit in church, sit down, and that's it. When you're sat down.
And you actually did that? Because I wouldn't have.
Yes. And that's why it's crazy now that I'm free. It's crazy now talking about this, because I would literally, Amy, I was living by myself. I was a single woman. I didn't have any kids or anything. I would get up on a Sunday, get dressed, to go sit in shame.
Why?
Because I felt like that's what I had to do. It was a cultish type situation. They call it a denomination, a way of life. And I'm speaking particularly of the apostolic denomination. This was an apostolic church. hell and fire, brimstone. You have to speak in tongues to get into heaven, which I don't believe. It was a very it was a very violent church in the sense of mentally and emotionally. And they made you feel like, and I have to take some responsibility as well because I was a broken person. My family was absolutely dysfunctional. I had nobody to lean on. So when I came into this church, this group, they became my church family. They became the people I hung out with.
I get that.
As a matter of fact, before I got pregnant, I was roommates with the pastor's daughter. We were roommates for like 2 years. And then I moved out to my own place, and that's when I got pregnant. I was a part of, I spent Christmases with the pastor's family. Like I felt like I was family. In my mind,
They were your
I
people.
thought that I was a daughter. So if I make a mistake or if I do something wrong, I thought that I would be loved, but not one person from that church or that community particularly. But there were some people that are Christians, that are pastors, that have helped me and reached out to me, that are not of the apostolic denomination. So it's not church as a whole, but this particular situation and environment, not one person.
Which just breaks my heart and is opposite of the gospel. We see Jesus hanging out with broken people. In fact, he picked hanging out with broken people above all else. One of my favorite stories, and you can find it in all 4 gospels, is when he ran into the Samaritan woman at the well. And she was like, I'm not even worthy for you to be talking to me. He was like, I want to hang out with you. And by the way, can you give me some water? You know? And so I think I can't imagine what your heart must have been feeling and how lonely you must have been. So let's fast forward. You have your beautiful daughter, Gabrielle.
Yes.
Somehow you got from where you were broken and hurt, where no one and I'm air quoting when I say church, because I'm so grateful for the Christians, the real Christians that came along after you and did not judge you based on their based on how they feel like you should be living your life. And again, this is a whole nother podcast on sexual purity, and I'm not here to have that conversation. But the reality is that you're a human being who is having a human being who loved Jesus in a church and nobody helped. And so before I ask you the next question, tell us what would have been helpful. So this is for my listeners out there who are either, well, if you go to church and you look at another human being on either side of you at any time who is perhaps going through something like this, whether they've gotten pregnant out of wedlock or like me, they stayed in a domestic violence marriage for 12 years, what would you have liked and what would have been helpful and less damaging so after that meeting with the pastor, which is that's terrible. It just makes my heart break. But what could have the church done to not traumatize you as you were pregnant with your child? What are some practical things that people out there listening who do believe?
Let's go all the way to the beginning. I think that we should tell our youth why they should not have sex before marriage.
Yeah.
Because I said, I grew up in the church. I grew up in the youth group. I sat through all the lessons, but it never was a why. It was don't have sex before marriage because God says so.
Yeah.
Well, why not? I have all these hormones raging through me. I'm going to dances. I'm watching videos on TV. My other friends are doing whatever. And so I am a very analytical person. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are like, okay, why? You're telling me this, but why? I think that we should be transparent and vulnerable enough to sit down and say why. So now that I have the opportunity to youth pastor, I'm going to tell my kids, you shouldn't have sex before marriage because of the emotional issues, because you could potentially become attached to someone for the rest of your life that you hate. You don't want to do this because of the consequences, the after effects. That's the first thing, is to actually tell youth why you should not have sex before marriage. The second thing is there should be some sort of programming, some sort of ministry for single mothers or for mothers that are having children outside of wedlock, because it's 2021. It's a thing. It's what happens.
Still.
You can't cover it up. You can't shame people or sit them down or just act like they don't exist because they're not married. There should be a ministry in place. There should be auxiliary something that are focused on single mothers, because just like being single in the church, it's a whole nother ball game being a single mother in the church. Being a single mother in this world, it's an experience that only single mothers can attest to. Mothers can't even relate to what it's like to be a single mother. So I think that there should be some sort of ministry classes, life skill classes, breakout groups, small groups, whatever your church holds, that ministers to the single parent, or the woman, or even the man that has to raise a child alone. Because we can harp on the fact that it's a sin all day. Yes, but the baby.
But it happens.
But it happened.
Amen.
But the baby is a blessing. I have had sex before and have not gotten pregnant. And I'm sure a lot of people listening have. But I had sex this one time and I got pregnant. Why? Because God allowed it. He controls everything. My daughter was supposed to be here before the very foundations of the world. She was written in my story before my fingerprints were crafted on my hands. She was supposed to be here. So now that she's here, or now that she's quote unquote on the way, how can we help this mother be the best mother that she can possibly be in her situation, in her environment? I think that's what needs to be the focus in the church. Just like any other ministry, we have a singles ministry, marriage ministry, men's ministry, women's ministry. There should be a ministry that ministers to the soul of that vessel that is experiencing this situation.
I could not agree with you more, because it is going, getting pregnant out of wedlock has happened since the beginning of time, and it's not going to end until the trumpets, until we're all looking east or we're already in heaven. It's not going to end. And so I could not agree with you more. I know that if I were in that situation, I taught your age so this is why I love your generation so much, is because in between, when I left my domestic violence marriage, I went back into the classroom and I taught kids that graduated in 2007, 2008, 2009. So your age group. And I just really feel like those kids, I had kids coming in that were cutting and doing all the things that weren't mainstream in church. And had I not been given the wisdom from the Lord to just love those kids first, and meet them where they were, then they would be on the other side of a podcast like this saying, I really wish somebody would have just given me a hug, because you were bringing a life into the world. You were bringing a precious life into the world, and all you got was judged instead of loved. And that in and of itself, withholding love, is trauma, particularly in a church situation. And then people on the outside look at stories like yours and they go, why would I want your Jesus when you guys are a bunch of judgmental people? Because the fact of the matter is by the grace of God, there go I. By the grace of God, there go I. And I don't care if we're talking about getting pregnant out of wedlock or any number of things. When somebody is hurting and they're broken and they're bruised, we are commanded to come along and walk alongside of them and shine them to what my podcast calls the star of the story. And so as we end the podcast, I want to ask you and again, you guys heard her bio. It's all going to be in the show notes. This woman deeply, deeply loves Jesus, spends copious amounts of her own time helping people get the word of God out. And that very well could not have happened. And I want to know, how did you turn that into not bitterness and not anger? Because there are people listening right now that are bitter and they are angry and they're not pursuing Jesus or anybody have anything to do with Jesus. How did you get from ostracized, sat down, looked down upon, probably not even physically hugged inside your church? How did you not blame God, and how did you get from there to here 7 years later?
Well, let me be honest. I was mad for a long time, bitter for a long time, probably about, my daughter's 7, probably about 5 years, just angry, bitter. And how I got to a point of freedom is by doing the work. I went to therapy. I wrote a show. My first stage play was called I Wish I Had a Daddy. And it speaks to my personal experience of fatherlessness. But I also put that whole situation in there because the pastor at the time, I consider him to be a spiritual father. So I wrote a show where that was absolutely therapeutic for me because I was able to tell my side in an artistic way.
Right.
I surrounded myself with people who I knew loved me and cared for me. I stopped going and voluntarily going into those toxic situations. So I would say to anybody that's dealing with the bitterness and the anger is to do the work. What I did for a long time, Amy, was I sat there and I was angry and I blamed other people. I blamed my misery. I blamed my disgust on other people because what they did 7, 5, 4, 3 years ago. But there comes a point where you have to literally take up your bed and walk. People
Amen.
can bring you to Jesus. People can pray you to Jesus. And you can even pray yourself to Jesus. But the Bible is emphatically clear when it says that faith without works is dead. And your happiness is your responsibility. Yes, what somebody did to you is absolutely wrong, but your healing is in your hands. And you literally have to do the work. Is it painful? Absolutely. Is it tough? You are absolutely correct. It's tough. I cry sometimes now because I still have to deal with my child's father because my child's here and that's her father. I'm not going to keep her from him or anything like that, but because because I've gotten over it. But he is still so angry that he keeps dragging me to court. I'm dealing with a court battle right now, surrounding my daughter. He still throws my name through the dirt because I have left that side of religion, but I'm still doing work in the community. So any chance he gets, he throws my name under the dust. It's just some things that I have to take and I have to process through and I have to do the work to let it go and to keep the main thing. And I said all that to say for those who are dealing with this situation in particular or any situation, because any blessing that you have, any ministry, any product of God's spirit that you have is a birthing process. So although you may not have birthed a physical child, you have birthed something into this world that is precious to you that has been attacked and that takes time. And I want to say to those people to put on your armor, and to understand that no weapon that is formed against you shall prosper. The same God that allowed this situation to happen is the same God that gives you breath every day, is the same God that allows his sun to shine on you, is the same God that allows you to hear the laughter of your child, that allows you to hug your child, that allows you to experience this dispensation of time. And although that one thing happened that God did allow, it made you the person that you are today. So I would say to that person to do the work, take up your bed and walk, and understand that faith without works is dead.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we like to call a mic drop around these parts. And so yeah, I have one more question for you. I know the answer. Is Jesus the star of the Tiffany Countryman story?
He is the star. I follow Christ. Christ is my path to God. I will never denounce that, no matter what. I am convinced for so many other things that you have to bring me back, that the blood of Jesus is what works for me. So yes, Christ is the star. He's the bright and morning star, actually.
Amen. Amen. And I'm looking across this Zoom call, and we've not been in as many clubhouse rooms as we need to be together, but we like to take some left turns, and but I wanted to have you here on the series season finale because I knew that Jesus is the star of your story. I wanted a different perspective. I wanted a different generational perspective. I want those of you listening out there to know that these kinds of things have been happening since I was 25 years old. And so we are, and certainly happened when somebody before me was 25 years old, where we turned what the church has deemed, and many times even scripture, but that is not Jesus. That is not the star of the story. And so if you're under the sound of my voice, we have spent a season talking about how people get from these crooked roads of pain, how Tiffany got from a room where she's literally sitting down and 3 men are looking down on her, and then she spends 6 or 7 months in a church where nobody even gave her a hug, even offered prayers, even any of those things. And that's a special kind of hurt that you will take to your grave with you. But I am so proud of you. I'm so grateful for you. I'm so grateful that you're still using your voice, that like me, you get behind microphones and you get behind podiums and you get behind keyboards and you do your thing, because let me tell you that no matter what, nothing but the blood can free us from bitterness, from anger, and from resentment, from any sin that we do. Nothing but the blood. But when we are having these encounters with people inside of places of worship, particularly in 2021, we need to love on them, be their tribe, be their community, and not. I love that you brought up that scripture, because nothing, neither life nor death nor principalities nor anything can separate us from the love of God. That is Romans 8, and the last 2 verses of Romans 8. Read that whole chapter, guys, because it is so rich and so powerful when it comes to armoring ourselves for moving through these hurts and these pains. And so, Tiffany, we are going to have you back. You're taking us out with a bam. My listeners are going to be so excited to hear you. I want to thank you for being here today. And as we move into the next season of dealing with it, which is not yet titled, and we'll be dropping that soon, but as we move into the next season, I will have you on as we continue to talk about this, because one of the things I like that you do that's going to keep me young is pushing me. And so I want to have some of these other conversations as it pertains to inside the church. And so, but what you've done here today is you've given people hope that when you are so enthralled and really, like I think you said it best, an occult-like attendance of a church where you would walk in there willingly, dressed to the nines, and let people literally ignore you, which is the worst thing you can do to people. That is so admirable, but also so, actually, no, it's not admirable. It's scary, and it tells us that we're still in 2021 coming from a posture of fear and judgment in our churches. And they're getting that from somewhere. They're either getting it from their own dogma, or they're getting it from the pulpit. And wherever they're getting it from, I don't care, guys, whether this is an affair. I don't care if it's a baby out of wedlock. I don't care if it's like me, where you're addicted to pain pills. You gotta love people where they are. You don't get to decide whether or not they deserve your hugs, your prayers, your voice in their life. We are called to do life in community. Jesus sat with the woman at the well who had like 5 husbands, and he said, and by the way, the one you're with now is not even your husband.
Not even yours.
Not even yours. And so if you're under the sound of my voice and you are feeling conviction because you have treated somebody like this, please know that I'm staring across the screen at somebody who is a miracle, that's just sitting here as a miracle, because she could have walked away from the church completely. She could have walked away from Jesus completely. She did not do that. And you didn't do that because greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. That's why you didn't do that. That is why you didn't do that. I love you, girl. I love your story. I don't even know your daughter, but I've seen beautiful pictures of her on Facebook, and can't imagine a world without Gabrielle. And so that this leads me back, and it's a great verse to end on in this season on, is Joel 2:25, where God promises, I will restore all the years that the locusts have stolen. And he is doing that in your life, Tiffany, the homie, and he's doing that in my life. And he's doing that in the lives of people who have experienced spiritual trauma. And going into the next season, we're going to talk about that. So thank you for being here today. Thank you, listeners, for listening. And as we end this podcast, and as Phil Baker's song plays us out of the podcast, Marked by You, Be marked by him. Look for hurting people in your church. And until we come back in the middle of September, we'll be back here in the Healing Zone in the Wednesdays with Watson podcast. Be looking on all the social media for the title of the next season and all the things. But I am so grateful that Tiffany, you have spent your time here with me today, and you're going to take us out into the sunset. Much love, my friend, and I will see you on those clubhouse streets.
I see you in these clubhouse streets. Bye-bye.
So, guys, that was a fun interview with Tiff the homie. Thank you so much for hanging out with me for a little bit of a longer episode. This is an important topic and one we will explore a little bit more going into season 3. I would love to just thank you, the listeners, for this ride. 2 seasons we've done this, and we hit a milestone during this season, of which I will be announcing at the beginning of season 3. But it is a very, very cool milestone, and I'm so grateful to you. Special thanks to all of my guests, the professionals, the people that were brave enough to come on and tell their stories. We couldn't have done that without you. Special thanks to my editor, Amy Hyland, and producer as well of the podcast, as well as my website. Thank you to Brittany Knight for the podcast cover and Anna Roberts for the original logo design. Most of all, thank you, Jesus, the star of the story. You are simply everything to me. Immediately following this episode is a special drop, part 2 of a podcast that I dropped a couple episodes ago. This is my story. These are my songs. This was originally only heard on my friend Stephanie Baker's The Faithful podcast, and so I wanted to provide it for those of you who did not hear part 2 of my story. This is my story. These are my songs. I would love to connect with you. Part of my favorite part of podcasting is the connection with you, the listener. And so I provided my link tree in the show notes, and you can reach me various and sundry ways. As for me, I'll be back here in 2 weeks in the Healing Zone with some in-between episodes before we start next season. But until then, you know what I'm going to say, as I always do in the Healing Zone. You are seen, you are known, you are loved, you are heard, and you are valued. And so, until 2 weeks, let the healing continue.
So let my life glorify you and teach me to walk beside